And welcome everybody to episode 3 of Winging It. I'm your host, Eric Shupps, with my co-host, Mr. Robert Bogue. Rob, how are you?
I am well. It's a great day in the neighborhood.
Indeed it is. The weather's finally starting to warm up a little bit here. Can't complain about that. I don't know where you are, but here I believe...
You know where I'm at. What are you talking about?
I don't know how the weather is where you are.
You don't know how the weather is where I'm at. It's actually really nice out today. I can see sunshine.
Sunshine is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a very good thing.
So this month, our topic is a rather interesting one, and that is the entire concept of security and compliance as it relates to migrations. And joining us this month is our special guest, Benjamin Niaulin from ShareGate. Ben,
hey,
welcome.
How's it going?
Glad you could join us. Well, we just started, so you're just in time.
Hi, precisely on time.
And you are joining us from the frozen north of, exactly where are you?
Montreal. Quite cold Montreal, I'm not gonna lie.
Indeed. Well, we were just talking how it's warming up where we are, but not the case for you.
No, I guess it's warming up a little, but it's all relative, right? So we were at minus 38 Celsius. Let me get that in
minus 38 Celsius is too darn cold.
Yeah, that's minus 38. That's minus 36.4 Fahrenheit.
It's about the same.
It's where human beings should not live.
Yeah, well, there's a very popular meme here in Montreal that it's a person walking outside and says, "Why do I live where the wind hurts my face?"
Exactly, and doesn't allow you to breathe.
Yeah.
Well, you're a hardier soul than either of us, and both of you more than me. I can't put up with temperatures that cold for sure. Benjamin, you just some quick background for the like 3 people who don't already know who you are. You've been with ShareGate for a very long time, but just give us a quick background.
Background? How far back? I've been at ShareGate for 12 years.
The dinosaurs came.
Yeah. I mean, I met the owners or founders of ShareGate at a conference, the SharePoint conference in Anaheim in 2011. Yeah, 2011. I had asked the company that I used to work at, saying, "Hey, there's this thing called SharePoint that seems to be getting popularity." I was in Exchange, and Microsoft's naming of products has always been great. I used to work in a product called Scum. So System Center Operations Manager, but Scum. So I was doing a lot of that. I was doing a lot of SCCM or Deployment Manager.
System Center.
I was doing System Center Configuration Manager. I was doing a lot of Exchange. Was doing a lot of Active Directory. But every time I saw customers, they would ask, SharePoint, can you set up SharePoint and this? And I'm like, I don't want to do any web stuff. I kept saying no. At some point, I figured, no, I got to go, I guess, towards the web-based software. And then I realized that I really enjoyed SharePoint. I kind of started going into it. And I went to the conference in 2011. And, they announced all this great stuff. The BPOS, we're going online. And I met these French-speaking people and realized, hey, you are also from Montreal. And probably skipped a lot of sessions back then and just hung out and, explored. And then I joined ShareGate and I've been there for 12 years. And through it, I've done a couple of things. I've done things that today I think we would call it product marketing, but also content writing. So blogs, going to conferences, never really trying to pitch the product either, just talking about SharePoint and Office 365 then, and just, I always felt like if you help people truly with what they need and the problems that they live, then, the rest is going to come. But if you care about the people on the other side and you try to deliver content that helps, then ultimately you're good. So it's kind of how we've gone about it. And today I still work at ShareGate.
Indeed so.
That was a short version.
ShareGate is primarily known, of course, for its migration tools in the SharePoint space, which we're going to talk a lot about today. But that's not all you do. over at ShareGate. You've got
Yeah.
other products, and some of which I know you've been instrumental in bringing to market.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So the ShareGate's actually one of the products that are inside of the company that that is more known around Quebec, but not so much worldwide, and that's GSoft. I've heard the jokes, but essentially, it really is a software company that builds software around building better workplace. And ShareGate's the portion that's around really productivity at work with SharePoint and then M365 and obviously Teams and so on. But we also have products around the HR, the managers. So we have a product called Office Vibe that's employee engagement. We also have a product about onboarding called Soft Start. We recently acquired a new company that does LMS called Didact. And we have another product in the works. So really about building products and really enjoy it. At ShareGate, we don't just do migration. So we've launched migration. That's how we are known in the market. But we also started going towards management and governance, which was the natural flow for a lot of migration tools as well, because people are migrating towards Office 365 for most cases. I know people will migrate to on-premises as well. But then, they're faced with, especially with what happened in the last couple of years, everyone migrated, everyone went into Teams. There's Teams everywhere. There's groups everywhere. There's sites everywhere. So then they started looking into, how do I make it so that people are using the products in the best way possible to help them work better? So some people call it governance, adoption, guidelines, guardrails. Like there's tons of different names that I've heard, but essentially it's just helping IT set up an environment that allows people to work with the tools that they have in a much better way possible. And that's what we try to do.
So what we wanted to talk about today was some interesting things that have been changing recently in our industry. For some period of time, the movement to the cloud has been picking up steam, of course, as the product has matured or the service offering has matured and has greater capabilities. And I think it's safe to say that probably the majority of the daily user of SharePoint is probably in the cloud these days in M365. But there's still a large contingent of customers who are on-prem for a number of reasons. Some because their organization just isn't equipped for the cloud move yet. Some because they have so much legacy information on-prem. Some because they need to upskill. There's lots of reasons that folks haven't yet moved to the cloud. But one thing that's starting to happen in the industry that seems to be flying a little bit under the radar that was actually brought up by a conversation that Rob and I are having is that insurance companies are starting to look at and ask questions about your on-premises software infrastructure as part of your cybersecurity policy. So they're basically saying that you have to be on the latest patch levels for the software that are available, and they have to be supported, or we may not underwrite you, or you may need a writer, or you may need an exclusion, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Rob had mentioned this to me, and I thought, the last time we renewed our insurance, I remember seeing a clause that I'd never seen before. In this case, it was about Exchange, and they were asking about specific patches about if you were on Exchange. I thought, wow, this is interesting because we're right in that stage now where Windows Server 2012 R2 is going out of mainline support. SharePoint 2013 goes out of mainline support this year, right? No more patches available. So beyond hey, we need to move to the cloud for general business purposes, we're now starting to see security and risk compliance around not migrating to the cloud and what that could entail to your business and potentially be significant penalties around that. Have you had conversations with customers or with partners that this is a driving factor towards their migrations?
I don't know that everyone's that aware of it. So that'll probably be good for listeners. And from our customers, or the way what I hear is it's much more about preferences or certain rules that they have to that they need to follow. But then there'd be we see a lot of hybrid scenarios. So we see a lot of customers wanting to migrate to the latest of on-premises so that they can work with also the Office 365 version. But we haven't really had that many customer talking to us about going to on-prem and then worried about the insurance portion of it. I will ask the team and get back, but it is it's a very interesting point, and it probably does drive a lot of those conversations. Yeah,
I think one of the things that's interesting is it's the kind of confluence of the expertise around cyber insurance improving alongside of this next cycle, right? Like when we were back in 2010 and when 2010 went end of life, I remember people going, at some point, maybe we should possibly do something about this software that is no longer supported, no longer gets patches. But with the cyber insurance and the need to ensure that you are doing the right things to protect, it suddenly has this interesting urgency, right? Like,
but we are getting
said we're going to move.
Yeah. But we're getting a lot more questions around security. That's for sure. So the expertise around understanding what's happening, understanding like what. So I could understand about the patch level, but just generally speaking, organizations are a lot better equipped than they used to be around security and everything that's happening in the market, plus the general knowledge that's leveling up. I'm not surprised at all with what you're saying around the on-premises and the patch levels, but I'll be transparent. Although we do have still a lot of on-premises migration, the number is eclipsed by going to the cloud. It's
right.
It's no longer not even a comparison. It's Office 365 by far.
Right.
Well, I would ask also, traditionally your bread and butter, I guess, has been those on-premise moves to the cloud. But are you seeing more cloud to cloud migrations?
Biggest source.
Maybe go from tenant to tenant.
Yeah, it's growing to become the number one source of migrations, surpassing file shares to the cloud or on-premises servers to the cloud. We're now seeing either staging to production sometimes, or testing and whatever. They want some content to be able to be tested in two places. But the true scenarios is especially given the current economy, we're seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening. So that number of migrations where you acquire a company that's already on Office 365, but you're going to have to make some decisions and bring it along. So we're seeing that number grow quite a bit. So tenant to tenant is a big one. And as of course, our migration tools also used for people to reorganize and restructure. So what I was seeing is people are bringing everything as fast as possible to the cloud. And then they're doing the migration step 2, as a second phase, where they're like, there's this thing called Teams and I have a ton of subsites and that's how I was organized. So now I got to restructure my environment so that it's flat or, stuff like that.
And turn on hubs and do all that.
Yeah, exactly. They learn about the platform after they decided that they were going to go there. The first step is we need to go there as fast as possible. We need to, cut ties with the on-premises scenario. And we want the least amount of impact on the business, right? The desires, I would say.
Right. We used to talk about, there used to be this really big discussion about, do you reorganize first and then migrate, or do you migrate and then reorganize, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that was rot and all the old materials and why migrate something that you grew? And it's really funny because in most of the client scenarios that I've been involved with, I would tell them, look, throw it all up there, push it all up, because the level of insight and activity, the ability, the capabilities, all the stuff you're going to get there is worth it. And then you can start turning on things like retention and process this in a way that is consistent, because doing it on-prem, even if you buy tools, is just not very efficient.
Yeah. I mean, we see a number of things. Typically what I would tell customers is ideally, as you're moving to the cloud, you've also done some kind of work to eliminate the things, to not bring everything as it was. Right. So, if you don't have to keep all the versioning history of every single thing that's existed since, the 2000, then let's right. clean that up. Let's bring over the last version only. If you don't need, because the more you go towards, the more you've used SharePoint in the past, or the more you want to bring the history, the longer your migration is going to be. Because what's fast is bringing the files. That's the fastest part. but
Right.
you want to keep the unique permissions, you want to keep the metadata, you want to keep the version history, then the APIs are not so successful. And that's where our product needs to like do a bunch of stuff, and that
Right.
like elongate, like, is that the right word? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
speaking. Yeah. The process and the timeline that people are usually worried about, right? People want to know, how long is my migration going to take? And I don't know. It
Right.
depends. Sometimes we have people doing multiple terabytes in a day because they're uploading big files that have no metadata. And then
Right.
sometimes like that could take a couple of days at the same time, because small files, tons of metadata, tons of unique permissions, or you know, metadata that has specialty like term sets and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of the
BCS, yeah.
one of the things I think that, you know, in terms of the tool set that I found incredibly useful is that incremental change, right? So I'm going to push it all, and if that takes a week or a month or a year or whatever it takes, hopefully it doesn't take a year, but if it takes a while, great, right? But then the ability to go scan backwards and go, okay, so these 20 things or these 50 things have changed since the migration, and I'll push those changes, and that's been super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's add a wrinkle to that, because with the security compliance thing in mind, because one of the most common scenarios that we've encountered doing cloud migrations now for the past 4, 5, 6 years, however long it's been, is that organization will say, let's take our high profile stuff that's used the most often or that easily translates to the cloud, right? And let's just move that. And the stuff that hardly gets touched that much, or it's really super complicated or has a bunch of customizations, we're going to leave that on-prem. And then we're going to work on getting that stuff to the cloud, right, as we can, which is a perfectly viable approach. Unless, of course, you're on SharePoint 2013 and you're facing an end of life in July of 2023. And suddenly now your insurance underwriter is no longer going to cover you because, that product has gone out of support. So now you've got a significant hurdle in front of you, probably not insurmountable, but significant nonetheless, that you have to approach. And you may not even be aware that that hurdle exists that you're coming up on. So you have to now factor that into your migration plan and say, is it even feasible to do this incrementally, or do we just have to take this whole thing and just, well, of course, we wish there was the big push it once button. That doesn't exist, right? Microsoft not a lot of help in that area, unfortunately, but so we're just kind of stuck with that. But I'm wondering if customers aren't going to have to start reorienting their thinking around the way they've been planning these migrations.
Yeah, it could be. It's interesting. I haven't even thought about all of this. Yeah, like you're bringing up a lot of the end of life coming up, but that the insurance portion to it, I think, is a very important criteria that it's true. We do start seeing a lot more concerns over how secure is where your work is, with everything happening these days where companies get data stolen and stuff like that. Wow. Yeah. I do still believe, I don't know, is it me that has the little echo? I do still believe that what customers are going to be looking for, because they might not all have this level of knowledge, and the requirement to migrate might just come from the organization that may have looked at the insurance, but the person that's going to plan and do the migration might just have a due date, and that's what they'll have to work with. So they'll be looking at, how do I plan this migration with limiting my cost, optimizing my delivery, making sure the company is as little as impacted as possible. Is my guess is, although you're right, I think they should probably plan it differently. It's probably going to be the same. There's a due date. I'm going to have to deliver it, and I'm going to deliver it as best as I can.
I think one of the other things that I see, and so we definitely do those deliveries. We definitely have those hard time frames. But one of the other things that I see is that clients are trying to figure out how to parse the work in a way that is not disruptive to the users, right? Like, how do I know which sites to move, and how do I get that order right? And I think that's one of those places where getting to swap the intranet, go swap the navigation, the way that they move over, even if that navigation is pointing to on-prem and old sites and whatever, and then you get that chance to kind of incrementally, okay, everybody goes here, and then you click the foobar option, right? And one day we're going to make foobar go, instead of on-prem, it's going to go to the cloud. It's going to go to your new team, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think from what we had surveyed customers a while back, and we had seen that the longest part of the work for the migration is actually the preparation.
Yeah.
The doing the migration is actually considered to be relatively easy, except for the couple of bugs or issues that you may run into, and you just deal with it. The hardest part was planning it. Like, what are we going to migrate? What is it going to map to? What decisions are we making? Like the analysis, what's not going to work during the migration? Where do we have workflows? Where do we, like, all of this phase is the longest and the hardest part, because most of the time you don't even know how to begin if you don't have consultants, or like you don't have the expertise. It's quite a big project. We all of this resonates quite a bit.
One of the challenges that we've run into, just because of the client base we work with, is that there are a number of customers looking to go to GCC or GCC High as part of their migration effort from on-prem, which on the surface sounds great, right? You're DoD or a DoD contractor, right? Or maybe you're fourth down the chain, but because of your contractual requirements, you have to go along with that effort. And then they only after the fact that they realize some of those capabilities don't exist, right? That you can't make this graph call, or you can't do that thing. That's within the, not to dig into the weeds of the product, but there are settings in your product that are graph reliant. Can we deploy an Azure AD?
Yeah, absolutely.
Graph calls. Oh, well,
as soon as
we can't
customers
do that.
Talk about GCC High, we're like, ooh, that we would have to build a different product to make sure that it would work. So it
definitely challenges the planning stage of saying, how are we going to do these if security is our main objective, right? And compliance with whatever contractual obligations that we have, how do we do that in an effective way using the tools that are available? Because let's be honest, it's not like there is sort of one tool that rules them all. There's lots of different tools to do it. They all pretty much have limitations imposed by Microsoft, right? So like vendors are sitting around saying, how can we make the user life difficult today? But the surface of that, it can be complex, to your point, if you don't have experience with it, right? How can you do that effectively even before you start worrying about security? Then you layer in the security concerns on top of it, and it becomes a really big mess to manage. How do you, I know you work with both partners and directly with customers. I mean, we're a partner and you and I have worked together on stuff in the past, and so has Rob. How do you guide, or do you, when you're having these conversations with partners, how do you hear from them that they're helping customers overcome these, oh, we didn't realize it was that complicated challenges?
So to understand the question, you're asking what did they tell us? What was the main problem, or?
Well, so the partners are obviously in the front line, right?
Yeah,
working with the customers who
they're the ones doing the actual
sorts of issues. Yeah. So what's the feedback loop that comes to you as the ISV, as the product creator, says, oh, our customers are struggling with this preparation and planning phase. Here's what we did to solve it. And how do you sort of synthesize that into how can we do a product feature to make it better?
Yeah, we get a number of things. Like it depends. So some of the times it was a lot of. I think even you had sent us things about PowerShell modules and stuff like that, right? So even recently, it's our customers, we need to automate a lot of this stuff, or it's a larger migration, so we want to run scripts and automate that process. It would really help if we could use the new PowerShell, but so we get the request, but then we have the code base of our product that uses WPF or something, and there's all these constraints that come. So generally speaking, what we do is we have a portal. We have currently, I think we use user voice. We're about to change to something else, but with partners, a little bit different. We usually have a little bit more of a, closer relationship. So we're actually like interacting. We get the feedback. We get feedback typically by the nature of when consultants are brought to to work. Sometimes we get stuff around planning. Most of the time, it's about automating the process, because the consultant's going to see multiple customers. So they'll talk sometimes about one particular customer's problem or issue or challenge, and we'll take it as a customer feedback like others. And of course, then you have to map it against, our other thousands of customers impacted by this and blah, blah, blah. But most of the time what we get is things around automation process of the migration. So we've seen some consultants that have built complete interfaces on top of ShareGate, using our APIs, so that they've built the interface to manage the migration planning, if you will, and then it just executes the launches migration scripts with ShareGate. So we've taken that feedback to see like what can we do, and also not denature the product at the same time. But it's always hard. It's always hard because one challenge that we get when the feedback comes from partners is we want to make sure that the partner and the consultants are successful with their customers. What's missing is how many other customers need this. And that's always where it becomes like, okay, it sounds like it's a pretty big deal. How do we make sure that, everyone else needs this instead of us building something else, so to speak? I think that's as an ISV is often the hardest part of the request. But then some of the requests are much more straightforward. Like we need this feature to be able to sell. And then we're like, oh, okay, well, we'll add it on the roadmap, and then we've built it. And hopefully
I'm pretty sure the hardest part of your job is watching out for when Eric posts snarky comments on Facebook. And you have to mention, like, dude, you threw me under the bus.
No, I remember that. I was like, why didn't you just come and tell me? Yeah, I remember. No, it's fine. Most of the time, it's we've got to some recently. It varies all over the place. Like the consultants that are more in Europe, they have different kinds of requests given the type of customers. Like in Germany, and then we have the consultants or partners that are more in the GCC type of customers. So they're more dealing with government or education. Then we'll get these type of requests as well. Like, oh, can you support this feature that's only for teams education, like classes and stuff? And so we're like, okay, we could, but how many how many need it? How many, like, is this something that's like a showstopper? It's very difficult to like map out all of these requests and then tackle the one that has the highest impact for as many customers as possible. That's where I had one of our developers recently who temporarily took on for a few months the role of a product manager and told me at the end, it's a lot harder than I thought, this job. I'm like, yeah, it's not hard building the feature. What's hard is making a decision over what's the right thing to build next, because ideas is not what's hard to receive. It's really which one's the right one to tackle first, and that's what's hard.
Yeah, software development's easy, right? Like things work or they don't work. And okay, yeah, there's edge cases and environments and all that stuff, right? But yeah, that how do you predict which thing is the most needed in the market? And I think Eric and I both built stuff with solid signaling that this is super important. It really needs to be done, right? And then you get to the other side of it, and you're like, nobody's using that, or very few people are using it.
So we've gotten those, and the product management or product building is it's always guesses, because if we all knew what needed to be built, we'd all just be super successful. So it's always taking guesses, and hopefully it's the right one. But we've gotten those. We had multiple customers giving us feedback that like this feature needed X, Y, Z, or Z. I think you say
Z. We say here.
Yeah. So this feature needs a couple of extra things, and we started building it because like clearly people are asking for it. Like they're actually asking for it. So we started building it, and then we're like, hey, should we look at the data, the telemetry, to show if that scenario is actually the right scenario? So in the sense that I think the feature was, we need to be able to have so our feature, there's a chatbot or that sends and say, hey, there's an inactive team. Do you want to archive it? One of the features. And the customers were like, well, there's going to be, if I own 3 teams or 4 teams, it's going to feel like spam for the user. we need a feature that manages so that it all comes in one place and we can act it. And then we start building it. And then we're like, hold on, should we check the data? And then we looked at the data and we realized no customer or no user owns more than a couple of teams, and the likelihood of them being inactive is almost never. So they're more asking for a feature that they're fearing the impact of spam that could be generated, but in fact, it's just not there. And there's been a couple of features like that where if you just listen at the customer feedback, you'd want to build it. And then you start testing out the willingness to buy. You start testing out does that scenario actually happen? And sometimes you get some sort of surprising results.
Well, Rob, you work a lot with enterprise customers, as I do, but even more so in the healthcare space and some other areas where it's not just security, but it's also about privacy and personally identifiable information. And there's a lot of additional complications that go on to this process. So when you're talking to those customers about planning a migration, how challenging is it to get all of those concerns blended together into a solid execution path that you can take forward versus this thing is just going to languish forever because we can't get all the right people in the same room?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, right? Like, so this is I start with the perspective of, look, let's move it all and then let's figure it out. Right. And I generally start that way because of the exact thing you're talking about. Like, I don't know, and everybody's afraid and they're all running around with hair on fire and all that stuff. And so I generally start and we get them up. And I can tell you what's really interesting is after you turn on some DLP policies and you do some different things, right? So that the system is starting to look for, hey, this data sort of looks like PII. I'm going to go ahead and apply a policy to it. And once you do just a little bit of that, everybody's like, what do you mean it just figured that out? I'm like, well, that looks a lot like a social security number. Like, it knows what the pattern for a social security number is. And it looks like, and it's not perfect, right? Like it makes mistakes at times, but generally speaking, when I start to show them that, then they go, oh, okay. And then and on top of that, it's we're going to do MFA, which your classic on-prem systems don't do, or they don't do well, right? Yeah. And by the way, we're going to pay for the Azure Directory P1 license, and we're also going to geofence it. So you're a healthcare provider that only works in the West Coast of the United States, and so these documents are only accessible in that geo, right? And you start layering that stuff on after some sample projects, and they're like, okay, so how do we get there now? And you're like, well, we got a little bit of work to do, but I think that the benefits of the cloud are so much better than they ever were on-prem, that my trick is if I try and have the conversation with them, it goes nowhere. If I do a demo or a POC or a pilot or whatever, and we start to light up just a little bit, then they're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Let's go. I had one of my clients had a thou shalt never go to the cloud. And they literally said that we're never going to the cloud. And I'm like, okay, all right, fine. Right. COVID hit. They're like, so this cloud thing, we're all in. I'm like, not yet, you're not, but I get the point. You want to be there. I think for me, for all the negatives of COVID, and certainly the loss of life and the loss of productivity, and it certainly broke free the logjam of should we be on the cloud or not, right? And I don't know, Ben, if you guys saw that, where
so funny enough, because I get that question always, in terms of like, God, did you get more migrations and such? And I don't know. Like, looking at the data, because we followed closely, I cannot say that we had necessarily more migrations. We did, but I mean, like, not to the point that people might imagine happen. What we did see is the length of migrations. People were migrating a lot faster, but essentially for and I can't say that, but let's say I checked with other people that migrated, and they found the same similarities in terms of telemetry, is that we didn't necessarily see a huge jump of people that were not planning on migrating. Like, of course there were, and of course we do see that number, but generally speaking, what we saw is people started migrating a whole lot faster. So where before they said, we're going to take this over 2-3 years, we want to plan this, we want to do this right, and as we migrate, we're going to do this. All of a sudden, it was the migration needs to be done by next week, and so all of these migrations started speeding up. And the quantity, whatever could remove the friction or the complexities of the migration to go faster, because the throttling often happens when you start doing too many requests. So people are starting like, just bring the files. We don't even want the metadata. We just need to work. Like, let's just go. That's what we saw. That's really what we saw looking back at the data for a couple of years.
What did you see on the apricot side? What did you see in terms of did you see that spike of there's all this kind of Teams activity that just went vertical?
So in terms of Teams, we saw mostly in terms of sprawl. If I don't know if it's a word that you use there, but we saw the quantity of creation of teams for tenants grow to numbers that I don't even remember by heart, but they were, I don't know, I don't want to use the wrong words there, but it was pretty phenomenal in terms of creation per tenant, or the median was in a couple of hundreds and thousands per month sometimes. And so we saw a lot of usage there. I think the notion for companies to start managing, so investing time to start using our product for governance, that actually happened later. So as COVID hit, pandemic hit, all the migrations happened, we saw a huge increase in Teams and stuff, but the purpose or the focus of IT wasn't smooth sailing. Let's just switch over to management and governance now. It was, how do we make sure meetings work? What are we doing with the Office? What are we doing with 2F, multi-factor authentication? Is it good enough? What are we doing with this? All these other products, because obviously we're in Microsoft 365. That's where our business is. But the businesses that we help, that's not their only thing. They've got all these other things. They're using other products. They're not just on Microsoft 365. Now they're starting to be concerned about security. They saw like 17 companies next to them get hacked or get blocked, or customer data being stolen. They're like, we got to focus on security. So what happened, at least from my perspective and our customers, it seems that people wanted to migrate really, really, really fast. Then we saw what happened in their tenants, where a lot of things were created all over the place. No guidelines, no direction, no education, no adoption the right way, all over the place. But the business was running. And meanwhile, that little IT team or productivity team or whoever that was responsible for it, they were on other projects, because that was just one part of the business going to the cloud. There was a ton of other parts of the business going to the cloud. And then that started, they started either hiring or equipping themselves, and that started going to get calmer a little bit. But what we saw as well, in not so much anymore, because obviously now the economy, but in the past, there was really much more the mass hiring, right? What did they call it? The Great
Resignation.
But that also meant a whole lot of people hiring a whole lot of people. And who takes care of all these new onboardees? It's that same team. Do they have their laptops in time now remotely? How do you manage delivering these laptops? And how do you manage the people being let go or leaving to go get those laptops? The network at the homes, do they have the right Wi-Fi, security? Do we have everything in place? So their time was also on this. So before we got back into, are they using Teams right? And are they using SharePoint right? That wasn't, that's, to me, and what I could see, started picking back up in more of a 2022 phase, right? Around end of 2021, 2022. Then I started seeing, because now the economy is in a place where we need to do more with less. We need to automate
Right.
more. We need to make sure what we're using is being used right, and we're going back into that mode. So back to your point earlier, it's difficult building product. Yeah, because there's also the context of the market in there. So you could have the greatest product, but maybe right now everybody's hiring everyone, and so your product that's maybe focused on offboarding people, that's not relevant because
Right.
people are hiring right now. That's not so, but it might be relevant later. So there's always that timing and that market portion to it. Sorry.
So one of the things that to your point about automation, being squarely in that market and selling, automation utilities, we struggle with a backlog that's 8 miles long, right? And which ones do you pick that can deliver value or get out to the market quickly or whatnot? We're constantly getting requests. Can we do this? Can we do that? Can we do this?
Yeah.
By the same token, SharePoint's a big beast. You guys specialize in SharePoint migration, but SharePoint does a lot of things that can't be migrated to the cloud. Right? You can't take those BDC models and lots of things that you've created and stuff, or the cloud feature set isn't there to support it. And to ShareGate's credit, you've always stayed pretty focused on what you do, as your bread and butter. But it must be difficult to keep the reins around that and say, we're just not going to be everything to everybody.
Yeah, it's hard, and we're trying to, I'm trying. Especially right now, I'm trying to figure out, is there a way for me to go to these other, because there's also what Microsoft allows us to do at the end of the day. What's in the art of possible? Because people keep asking us. I'll give you an example. It's, can you migrate Power Automate and Power Apps? And can you, in the past, when Microsoft had announced certain things about the SharePoint workflow system, could you migrate those workflows into flows? I'm like, I'd love to. But I can't do anything with Power Automate because my product at some point cannot do something, which is management of connections. In Power Automate, Power Apps, you need the human to go and set up the connection. And I'm like, I don't know that as a product, I'd be comfortable saying, the migration is kind of half done for this place. You need to pause, go and navigate to the website, put in your credentials for connections, then come back. And so sometimes that's what's hard. It's, we can see it, we want to do it, we're ready to do it, and then the user experience is such a hassle, or the APIs aren't there, or XYZ or Z isn't there, and that's what's really tough. So although we're trying to stay we're definitely staying M365 focused, but we do want to expand and say, okay, let's go help you with these other things. And then every time we go, there seems to be some kind of a hurdle or something that becomes. So we're trying to figure out what are customers okay with. Is it okay for me to halfway migrate to your Power Automates, and then you have to do something manually in the interface when you're migrating tons of sites and tons of things? That's what we have to try and identify. That's where often we get stuck.
Well, I think even, if we go back to core product, right? You had to work around a whole lot of things that just don't work right in the SharePoint APIs, right? And having done that work for a couple of decades, I know there's just stuff it's just broken, right? Yeah. And you kind of have to finesse it. Hey, if I can round this corner, and if I could turn the switch on and off a couple of times, right? And I think those things don't even what's that today?
Content type.
Those things don't even exist in the Power Platform in a lot of places, right? Connections is a really great example of, there's no API for doing that, right?
No. So it's the classic. It is what it is. No, I'm kidding. No, it's a bit complicated.
In some closing thoughts here, let's look forward a little bit. And say, where do we see things going over the next few years? Obviously, Teams is going to continue to be a big thing, right? Continue to be a lot of work there. I don't know how Viva is impacting what you guys are doing, if at all. But
Viva for me is a brand, but yeah. So, where the things are going, I think that migration is going to continue, but differently. So people are going to be, at least in the foreseeable future, maybe the 2 years. Maybe I don't know if it's going to be that much long, but at least the next 2 years, given the market right now, I'm guessing we're going to see mergers, acquisitions, tenant to tenant, tenant to tenant migrations. And so we're going to see that. But also, if you're acquiring a company, what are the chances of them being on Office 365? Or if they're a smaller company, they might be on Slack, they might be on Google, they might be on something else. And so I think migration could evolve. And I think it's a reason why Microsoft also went towards those kind of solutions for migrations as well. So I think migration is going to grow, but it might expand to how do we acquire customers from new places that are not necessarily so cloud to cloud migrations rather than on premises to the cloud. So I think that's going to continue to grow. Concerns around security is going to grow big time. So I think, if you're going to start a business, even in consulting, you want to specialize in something. I think everything related to security, compliance, protection of data, in a world where you've brought your entire business to the cloud, and you're seeing the world of the web being the the choice of word is hard in this one, but we're seeing a lot of hacks and theft. That's all digital now, right? So you want to protect yourself against that. So people are going to be looking out for solutions, products, but also expertise in that field. And we saw it grow. So I talked to partners, and actually it's what I'm seeing a lot in Europe is consulting companies starting up their specialty in security across multiple products or across Azure and M365 security and compliance center. It becomes like a vertical offering that you can get from the consulting company and products as well. So seeing that, and then because of the economy portion of the market as well, everything related to automation. I know right now all the buzz is with ChatGPT and all of that, but what is that really is doing more with less, automating something that's currently manual. So in the past, that work could have been workflows for us for where we come from. I think in the future, it's going to be different kinds of automations. It's just trying to seize what that's going to be. Is it going to be a big bet on, automating things with AI, or is it going to be automating across multiple cloud solutions? Like there's definitely a play of we can't hire anymore. We're constrained. We're trying to do more, and all of that stuff that used to be hard to do, we want to commoditize. I can never sorry, I'm losing my English. I have to go back to conferences. But I think people are going to look to how do we make sure that process is automated but feels like it's the right way to do it nonetheless. So far, there's a number of other things across other categories that we're seeing through some research, like employee engagement, but in a different way. Employee performance now it's going to be more probably, I think, to talk. Where in the past we want to make sure everyone's happy, they got a coffee machine at work, they got whatever they want. Now is employee probably more performance management. Like do we have the right goals, the right one-on-one setup? Do you have the right syncs with your manager? Like that's going to be probably a direction that's going to be stronger and stronger.
Well, you mentioned
and stuff.
You mentioned something in there that we talk about a lot on our other series here in the Community Cloudcast, but that is multi-cloud. Right, there are organizations now that are trying to manage these multiple cloud environments. In some cases, migrating from one to the other as they move assets around, as cloud portability becomes a thing, and that's a huge challenge. No doubt for organizations. Absolutely. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have. As always happens on these, we get rolling and then we quickly run out of time because we can all talk for hours and have done in the past. But Ben, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
And for those of you who want to know more, you can go to www.share-gate.com.
ShareGate, one word now.
Ben, it's all one word now. We finally
all one word now.
URL. That's finally bought that.
We bought the domain.
and Ben, will you be joining us in Düsseldorf in Germany for the?
Yes, I'll absolutely see you there. Yeah.
So for those who want to talk a little bit more with Ben one-on-one, you can do that in Düsseldorf coming up in May. Rob, what's your next appearance at a conference?
I think AIM. I think it's April. I don't know what I'm doing.
At some point,
people manage that. I just go where I'm told.
Well, thankfully, at least they're coming back in person. We'll all see each other again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
So, Rob, as always, thank you. I appreciate
brother.
you listening this with me. Ben, thanks to you as well. And we will see all of you next month.
Cheers.